A lot of men feel like they're falling apart on the inside, disconnected from their families, overwhelmed at work, and unsure how to stay grounded when life gets heavy. Most guys don't realize they're missing the four rhythms that keeps a man whole. My guest today, Greg Woodard, is a former Navy chaplain who has spent years counseling men in some of the toughest environments on earth. He's going to show you the four rhythms that every man needs: relational, emotional, physical, and spiritual, and how one step in the weakest area can change everything. If you've been feeling stretched thin or stuck in survival mode, this episode gives you the roadmap to get your life back. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Valiant Forge podcast, where we help men overcome life's battles, show up better in the world, and become a valiant warrior for God. This is a place where we share practical strategies that will equip you on life's journey to help you become the man God has called you to be. Are you ready to overcome your doubt and fulfill your purpose just like Gideon? If so, let's go.
Greg, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on.
It's great to be here, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I was telling you just before we started, I love your story. So tell us about being a chaplain in the military for, was it 22 years?
So I was a chaplain for 15 years. I have a total of
Okay,
22 years of military service. I did
I see.
some enlisted time as a young Marine, and then later on in my life, I did a number of years as a Navy chaplain.
Hmm. And you served in some wars?
I did. So I have a very unique story in my military life. So right out of high school, I decided that I was going to go to college. College and me, probably mostly me, did not agree. I did not do well the first round of college. So then I began to explore what else might be out there with the high school education, middle of the road. I was an average student. There wasn't a lot for me, or at least things that I wanted to do. So I one day walked into a military recruiting center. It had all the branches were represented. The Marines were the most, I wish I had a better story than this. The Marines were the most responsive and they looked the best in their uniform. And so I decided that I wanted to be a Marine. And one thing led to another, and I ended up signing a contract. And then I served 6 total years as a Marine. And then once I got out, I did a little bit of time as a National Guardsman. Later on in my life, after marriage, I I went into the chaplaincy. So there's a lot of gaps in there, and I'm happy to flesh any of that out that you want. But that's just the overarching story of my military life.
Yeah. So were you a Christian when you first went into the military?
I grew up as a Christian, a great set of parents, wonderful upbringing. Grew up in a great church tradition. But I also knew I don't know how I knew this for sure, but it was something that I understood in my own heart. My faith needed to be my own. I don't have any doubt that I was a Christian when I joined the military. Um, but when I my first tour was in Okinawa after boot camp and after my occupational specialty training.
Hmm.
My first tour was in Okinawa, and I had grown up with I guess what I would consider to be a normal family. My um, I have a younger brother and and a younger sister. Um, with K through 12, same house. So things didn't change. There were normal childhood things that happened during the growing up years. Once I got to the Marine Corps, I sensed something. I don't know if it was missing. It was just not my own. So I spent a year total in Okinawa. 6 months I spent exploring, trying to figure out what I believed. Ultimately, I met a Christian missionary. He was a Vietnam veteran serving military members as a missionary in Okinawa, an American serviceman that had retired and medically retired. And he brought me into a discipleship, place of discipleship with him, with a group of men that he was mentoring. And that's where I formed my faith. And then I met another man, older man this time in California, my second place of duty, who also mentored me into my faith. And these were men that were very, very different in their understanding theologically than me. And it was important that I experience mentoring and discipleship from men that were very different than me.
Yeah.
It reminded me, or maybe showed me, that there was a faith world that was outside of the world that I grew up in. And so those were both very, very formative experiences. Long answer to your question, yes, I entered the military and came out of the military later on with my faith intact.
Yeah. So what led you to being a chaplain? Was it like, did you feel a call towards it, or was it just seemed like a good idea at the time?
Yeah, so I would say it's pretty tough to join the chaplaincy and it just feels like a good idea. There's a lot of things that you have to do. You have to have a certain level of education. You have to have a certain level of professional experience. But what happened, so I'll back up the story a little bit before I entered the chaplaincy. So I spent 3 years, about 3.5 years, serving as a pastor in a faith-based drug and alcohol recovery program, institutional ministry. Before that, I had served in a church that, and I'll say that again, probably more me than them. It wasn't a fit for me.
I see.
God had called me to ministry in high school. I went to college. As I said, I didn't do well and joined the military. Fast forward now, we're talking, that was all before marriage. And now we're talking after marriage. Um, I, I, I entered that environment after attending my graduate degree, gained a lot of really important experience and began to understand that ministry wasn't only in the church. Ministry could be outside the church. And so this was a very tough, a very tough program. It was long term for the men that were there as participants and as residents. And along the way, I began to sense that again, it was time to move into something different. I knew that I couldn't continue to do what I was doing uh, much longer. I was feeling pretty burned out. My resume began to float. Ultimately, an army chaplain recruiter called me.
Oh
I
wow.
could take you to the place in my office where I said, no, I'm not doing that. I was at this point 41, which is an interesting part of my story. I was in the Marine Corps in my 20s and then later on um, decided that I wanted to be a chaplain. And it was because he called me and then the job went away and my dad died in the midst of that. And I began to reevaluate who I was as a person, the legacy that it was very evident my dad had left a very deep and strong legacy for his children, for his wife, um, and lots of people. He'd impacted lots of people over the years, and I took some time to evaluate my legacy. This Army chaplain recruiter became involved in that process. I ultimately ended up in the Navy chaplaincy, but it was not planned. I would say that it was not a planned adventure, but it was one that God called me to and made it very clear to my wife and I. And ultimately, my kids were pretty young. They were 7 and 10 at the time, and so they were just along for the ride. I sent the email the chaplain recruiter sent me after I left my position. And I said to my wife, it was all the reasons why I should become a chaplain. And I sent it to her thinking surely she'd say no. Well, she didn't say no. She agreed that we should at least consider it, and one thing led to another, and we started walking the journey, and the door kept staying open, and I ultimately ended up serving in the chaplaincy. So, did I plan for it? No, but God ordered my steps to
Yeah.
prepare me for that experience.
The scripture that came to mind while you were telling this is man makes his plans, but the Lord directs his steps. It's in
Yeah, very much
Proverbs, I
so.
believe. Yes.
Very much so.
So now you're in the military. You were in the military as a chaplain, and throughout that you saw where men needed leadership. So you started to develop where we are today. You wrote a book on leadership and came up with some strategies.
Yeah, men and women need leadership. Yes, very much so. And I think the genesis of the book was a deployment on board a naval vessel.
Hmm.
I was just thinking about this week. I wrote a blog post where I was describing some of this story, and um, I again another very rigorous environment. We deployed into the Middle East. This was about a decade ago. And by all accounts, it was not an easy deployment. I didn't succeed every day, but by all accounts, it was a successful deployment. And I wanted to know why it was. For me, I stayed resilient. So I sat down after I got back uh, and journaled and wrote and thought about how did I stay resilient? What were my activities? What were the things that helped me um, to stay strong? And then ultimately I wrote a doctoral dissertation and that led me into the next step of doing a doctoral degree. And I learned that there were four for me in this deployment. Now there are certainly other rhythms. I'm going to mention four.
Yeah.
These are the four that kept me resilient and kept me whole. There was a relational rhythm. That's where I was connecting with the crew members. I was connecting with peers. I was staying connected to my family back home. I was watching other people as they were doing, other leaders as they were doing the same thing. By the way, I should say, I was the only chaplain in this environment. There were other care providers, doctor, corpsman, dental officer, but I was the only chaplain. So I was the one providing spiritual care, and I was doing the bulk of the counseling. Um, so a lot of people would come to me and ask me for guidance. So back to the rhythms. So one is relational. I'm an introvert, so I had to proactively find ways and connect with people that could support me because sometimes you need to not be the chaplain, you need to just be Greg.
Right.
Then also emotional rhythms, taking in a lot of stuff from a lot of people. I needed to make sure that I was checking in on my own emotions. Um, Not very many people were asking me how I was doing, and I wouldn't say I needed it, but every once in a while, you need somebody to ask how you're doing. But you don't expect that. So emotional, I was checking in on my emotions. Physical, I was taking care of myself physically, exercising, sleeping well. And then I'm stating this one last. This isn't last, but this is the other. This is probably the most important one, and that was my spiritual rhythms. As a chaplain, you're providing spiritual care. You're doing
Hmm.
spiritual things. You're leading worship services. You might be leading Bible studies, um, and you're doing it for other people. I had to remind myself often to do spiritual disciplines and practices for me that were not for the sake of building the next sermon that I needed to preach or the next Bible study I needed to lead. I needed to do spiritual practices for me. So, spiritual, physical, emotional, and relational are the four rhythms that were most important to me in that environment. And that's what I wrote on in the book that you mentioned, Leadership from Within.
What would you say for you personally is was the hardest rhythm to maintain during that time and also now?
Well, both times. Yeah, that's a good question. The definitely, I mentioned I'm an introvert, and I remain an introvert. I guess that's maybe something that just doesn't go away. So it was definitely hard for me to stay connected relationally. But I noticed when I didn't that I wasn't as able to be present for people. So when I wasn't connecting at a peer level in that environment, and when I was disconnecting from my spouse or from from my children, um, that was the hardest one, and also the most important one. The others, in some ways, came naturally. I mean, I'm a chaplain, so I'm going to do spiritual things. Um, the it was certainly a break to take time out to do physical activity. And it was in that environment that I got invited to be part of the command team's exercise routine. So we would go downstairs, down at the bottom of the ship, and work out together, um, which was a great opportunity, to stay fit. Uh, and I've always had a sense of who I am and taking care of myself emotionally. I knew that I needed to have an outlet for the things that I was taking in. But definitely and then now, so this is the latest chapter of my life as I've retired from the military. I retired 2.5 years ago. And again, and I work for myself or work from home. Usually it's me and my dog here at my house, in this office, in this space that I'm sitting in. I'm standing, I'm looking over at my desk where I do all my writing. So again, it's relational. I have to proactively seek, and nobody's coming and knocking on my door now. It used to be that people would come and knock on my door. Hey, Chaps, can you help me? Hey, Chaps, I need to talk to you. Um, could you pray for me? Whatever it was. And now it's not that way. And I don't need it to be that way, but I also have to be careful that I don't disconnect from people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same. Back then it was relational, and today it's relational.
So, since we're on the relational, what are some practical tips? I'm a fellow introvert myself, and I can agree. I don't think it ever goes away. I'm talking on a podcast now. I'm meeting new people 2 to 3 times a week now, and I totally agree. You have to have that relational rhythm. So, what are
Mhm.
some practical steps that someone can do to keep a relational rhythm? And I'm going to get into some of the others after you answer this.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, this is a mechanism we can do. It's amazing what we can do virtually now. So, I have a lot of variety of meetings during the week. I, I, um, I meet with a coach. I meet with a spiritual director. Those are both virtual. I do some coaching and some spiritual directing, and those are generally virtual. I proactively put meetings where I have a few friends that I have coffee with on a regular basis. Um, and for me too, even if I'm not with people, being around people, I go to the park. I take my dog over to the park almost every day. He and I are over at the park walking, interacting with people. Um, So that's I guess those are ways that I proactively do it. And then obviously I'm intimately connected with my wife. We are part together of a small group through our church, and we meet weekly, and that's been an important connection point. It's also great. My daughter and son-in-law are about 7 minutes away, so periodically I'll go over and see my and we have a new grandson. So it's a great opportunity to spend time with one of my children. My other son, my son is in Hawaii, so I don't get to see him very often. But um, it's staying connected. It's proactively staying connected with people, whether that's a familiar relationship or friendship or just being where other people are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard sometimes, but I know how I myself have been trying to just when I'm out in public, if I'm at a store and I'm paying for something, I'll ask someone, "How's your day going?" which is not easy for someone who's an introvert because then I got to strike up a conversation and like, okay,
Yeah.
what do I say next? And I got to, I just know how important it is. And I feel this call towards podcasting now. And I have to be kind of, I have to step outside of who I have to step outside of being an introvert. So
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
one a lot of those rhythms, you said you journaled this after you got out of being a chaplain. So these were just coming naturally to you and you realized it afterwards.
Say that question again, Mark.
So these rhythms while you were a chaplain, they were kind of coming you were just doing them naturally and then you realized it afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that they were always natural, but I I think I when I began to explore what it was that kept me
Mm,
whole, it was particularly, as I said, during this deployment. But as I look at the whole of my chaplain career, I would say that these four rhythms, really in any environment, whether I was deployed or not, were the four that were the most key towards keeping me whole. And I think the reason why is that soul care, when we think about soul care, so I've asked people, when you define how do you define soul care? And one of the most common responses is that's taking care of the spiritual part of yourself.
right.
If you really look at soul care, it's holistic. It's taking care of your body, your soul, which is your spirit. It's taking care of your mind, um, and it's staying connected with people. So there's a holistic nature to soul care. So in some ways, um, it was natural because this is the natural inclination of people that we need to be looking at all facets of our being. And if we're overemphasizing any facet of our being or neglecting any facet of our being, then we're not going to be as whole as we could be.
Yeah. So these rhythms, what I find interesting is because I'm diving into what it took for me to start changing to become a better man. And the first thing that came to me was my health. I'm 5'3" and I was 205 pounds when I started having my wake up call, I'll call it, to start changing who I am. And I know you
Yeah.
talked about the physical. I needed to develop a better relationship with my wife. I needed to find some brothers to hang around to that would sharpen me. And I knew it was important that I got myself around the right people. Because
Yeah.
it's one thing to be relational, but it's another thing to be relational with the right men and the right people. And
Yeah,
all of the things that you mentioned, the part of the reason I'm doing this podcast and started this movement is because I see so many men who aren't in the military, who are just going to work every day, and they're not doing any of these rhythms. And all it takes is a step in the right direction. So, what would you say to a man that's struggling in any of these areas?
well, if I could be a little self-serving here, I would point them to a page on my website. I have a very it's a very if anybody who looks at it will realize it's a very simple tool. It's a form. All it is a form. And I put these four rhythms and I ask people, I offer them the opportunity to grade themselves 0 through 5 on these four rhythms. And then I ask them to do a little bit of reflection on why they rated themselves the way they rated themselves in the rhythms. And then I ask them to pick the one, perhaps it's the one that received the lowest score, and pick a practice. So, for example, let's say, well, you brought up the example of your physical self. So, obviously, you needed to do some work physically. So,
Right.
that when you took this assessment, that may have been the lowest score. We'll just say, for the sake of this conversation, that it was the lowest score, and you picked a practice that was going to speak to your physical rhythm. So, you were going to add in walking 10,000 steps a day. That's the only practice that you implement. Well, that's a step. There are certainly others that you could, pick as a practice, but that's the first step towards building a physical rhythm. Or let's say that your connection with God is lacking. Uh, what's a practice that we might implement to rebuild our connection with God? Well, uh, we want to start reading a chapter, we want to read a psalm a day. And that's a way that we're going to connect with God and then spend 5 minutes praying over that psalm. That takes 15 minutes max.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be a large a large scale change. It just needs to be something small that's a beginning step in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. My story isn't a great example because I love the way you explained that. It's small steps towards being better. I went all in to where I went all into myself and I mistook the spiritual. I went better with my relationship and my physical health, but I didn't have the balance between the spiritual and I don't remember what the fourth one was. Um, the emotional. Yeah,
Well,
I didn't work on my emotions. I worked on my physical health and my relationship with my wife to where I started changing my diet completely, started running every day, lifting every day, and I got so into myself. And I was like, "Hey, wife, look at me." And I developed my relationship with my wife, but I forgot. I, I didn't forget. I just didn't know any better about the other two. So how does a man find balance between all four rhythms?
well, you're speaking my language. So any kind of soul care, any kind of self-care, any kind of improvement of yourself needs to be holistic. So these are four hooks. For me, these are four hooks. They're, these are the four that I advocate. And so there are practices within each one. And again, they don't have to be large scale practices. Let's say for the sake of this conversation, for emotional, one way to connect with your emotions is to journal. Have a couple of good questions. I can offer multiple questions that a man might pick to begin to look at his emotions and be honest with those emotions. So that's connecting with that's the emotional rhythm. Then for the physical, maybe we're going to check our sleep. We want to make sure we're sleeping well. We want to make sure that we get outside in the morning and get some sunshine. We want to make sure we get 10,000 steps in. And some of these can be done, like if you're out walking, you could be connecting spiritually by being prayerful during your walk. So you can combine two. So there's this idea some men want to be, really intentional and really um, they don't want to take a lot of time to do things because they got other important things that need to start happening. But combine a couple of them for the relational. Schedule a date night with your wife if you're married.
Right.
Schedule a date night with your daughter or son. I don't know if you'd call a time with your son a date, but spend some time. The point is spending some time with your
Right.
children. Um, Proactively reach out to a friend that you haven't talked to for a while and schedule a time to just sit down and have a conversation. Um, Make sure you're connected inside of a church, Uh, Everybody has a different idea about how they should relate to the church. For some, it's a barrier, but the point is we need to have a relational connection that is helping us build ourselves spiritually. So pick a practice in all four of the rhythms and begin to implement it and spend 10-15 minutes a day on it. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, these this like all in. If you're going to pick a physical rhythm, you're all in. You're going to run a marathon next, in 8 or 9 months. Well, I mean, that's a great goal, worthy goal, and maybe it's a realistic goal, but maybe it's not a realistic goal. Maybe you just need to start smaller and fix your eating habit.
Yeah.
Stop overeating.
Yeah. I think a lot of what you're talking about requires self-awareness. And I think a lot of us, so I know when I had my start at trying to become better, I had very little self-awareness. The only thing that I was really self-aware of is that my health was failing and I needed to change something because I didn't have enough self-awareness around the other things.
Right.
How can a person who's struggling in leadership and compartmentalizing things find self-awareness in the holistic area that they're struggling in?
Well, okay, personal opinion. Um, you may be able to do this in different ways, but you need to find somebody who can be really honest with you,
Hmm.
and you need to let them ask you some of the hard questions of your life. Like maybe they need to be able to ask you, how are you doing in your physical rhythm? How are you doing in your relational rhythm? How's your relationship with your wife? How's your relationship with your children? How are you being received at work? Are you feeling a barrier between you and those that you're working with and for, or that may be working for you? Are you a barrier leader, or are you a resonating leader? Are you drawing people to yourself, or are you repelling people? Um, and so that's one, is being really honest with yourself, asking yourself and letting somebody else ask you hard questions, um, that may or may not, that probably won't be comfortable. Maybe depending on the level of where you find yourself, you might need to have a coach. You might need a therapist. You might need somebody. You might want to consider a spiritual director,
Hmm.
somebody who can guide you into some spiritual practices. You might want to spend some time with a pastor. Um, Find somebody who's willing and able to ask you hard questions, and then listen to their responses. If you think you're doing really well, if you're married, ask your wife.
Right.
She may listen and say, "Well, I think you're wrong. I, I I don't think you're doing well in this area or that area." Or ask your kids. Sit down with your kids and say, "Hey, I want you to tell me how I'm doing. How are we connecting relationally?" And they may say, "Well, we're really not."
Yeah.
Or you may spend time with a coworker, and somebody that you may be the leader. You may need to listen to somebody who's reporting to you, and tell them that they have full permission to tell you that you're screwed up. And hopefully they'll
Yeah.
do it with a sense of professionalism. But the point is, you have to let people speak into your life. And there's any number of different, you know, assessment tools that are available on the market that can help you identify uh, some areas of strength or weakness. 360 reviews at work, do that kind of same kind of thing inside your
Yeah.
family structure.
Yeah. Don't be like me. So part of the reason, again, that I'm started this podcast is because I had that lone wolf mentality that I could do it all on my own. And a perfect example, and although I didn't do it the right way, I got so into my fitness and so into myself that even though I was developing my relationship with my wife, I was still neglecting it. And she came to me, and that's how this started. We were at not a great point in our marriage, even though I felt like I was spending more time with her. We were not at a great point because she saw where I was putting too much of my emphasis in one area. So I love what you're saying. Like reach out to somebody and ask somebody. Don't try to do it on your own. Don't get to the point to where someone has to come to you and say, "Hey, you're failing." So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can, I think I have all kinds of different examples of people who didn't ask, who didn't allow people to speak into their life, and they ended up wrecking a career. I have one friend in particular that I think of often, and he was the rising star, and
Mm.
then he wasn't, and it was because things were amiss in his life, and he was neglecting he was neglecting important areas of his life. He was out of balance. He was really good. And I think, I don't know how this fits into the conversation, but one thing that I really wrestle with is people with a lot of charisma. They succeed, um, but their character doesn't keep up.
Right.
And that is something that you always got to be looking at how's my character? Is my character forming alongside my success? Because if we're letting our success outpace our character, then we're going to almost inevitably we're going to crash and burn.
Hmm.
We're not going to end up. I would say this often to military members and I said it at my retirement ceremony. My family was sitting on the front row, and it doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else. It just means that my family was still there at the end of my career. And I have friends whose family wasn't there at the end of careers because something had gotten more attention than their family, and that was their career. And that's not hopefully that's not a common thing with men. I've encountered some who the family was there and some who the family wasn't there. So I don't know how common it is, but I know we can overemphasize the doing over the being. We got to make sure we're doing the being in the context of all of our doing.
Yeah. So speaking of the military and examples, do you have a story from the military when you were a chaplain that fuels your mission today?
Do I have a story
Or a sailor
that fuels my
story or
mission?
so? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose that I do. I have maybe I don't know if it's specifically chaplaincy. More, I would say it's in a ministry from the whole of my ministry, whether that was in the chaplaincy or not. The chaplaincy. Well, I'll keep it narrow to the chaplaincy. So there were many fast risers that were destined for great things. Um, they had all the right tours, they had all the right jobs. They got promoted when they should have gotten promoted. They could say the right things to the right people. And so we're not even just talking about chaplaincy, we're talking about just military members in general. Uh, that and they were really good at the things that they needed to be good at in order to succeed in that culture. Um, I think in one there's I think of two specific instances where um, we started off together. Um, somebody that was very that was we were pretty good friends. Um, we did our careers or early parts of our careers together. Um, if you go on his social media, he's not with the person that started off his career with him.
Hmm.
And that's a tragic story. And he was probably destined. I don't know if he would have risen to the highest level, but he was destined for great things. And then I have another friend who did attain a fairly high rank and is still with his family to this day. And I don't know if the way I'm saying this is making the point. In both cases, they had something wonderful to offer. One concentrated on his character, the other neglected his character,
Hmm.
and it became more about his career than it did his family. And um, and he's redeemed today. Not to say that you can't be redeemed out of failure,
Amen.
but if you can't if you're yeah, that environment, there were so many that I it's hard for me to put one,
Right.
to put one story around this conversation. But um that's what I would always say to people. Make sure that you're not neglecting the people that you want to be with you at the end of your career. The military is going to use you up, and I'm not saying anything in any way disparaging of the military. I served, I loved my service. But once you're done, you're done. And the military is part of my past. My family is part of my present.
Hmm.
And that's an important distinction. They're gonna and it happens in any organization. The organization is going to utilize your services, and they're going to for the most part they're going to treat you well, and they're going to give you what you need. They're going to pay you well. They're going to give you all the benefits of being part of that organization. But at the end of the career, they're not going to be part of your experience anymore.
Right. Right.
Your family is, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that was, I don't know if that was necessarily a great way of responding to your question. It's hard to put
No, it was.
one story around that point, but um, making sure that your character keeps up with your success is
Yeah.
critical.
No, that was a great answer. Sometimes I ask questions just to get a response like that. That was a fantastic response. I love what you do, and I love the holistic approach, the four relatable keys. Before we end the podcast, there's a question I ask every man that comes on the podcast. David, when he was in the cave of Adullam, was hiding from Saul. He wasn't hiding because he was scared. He was trying to respect his leader. The men in the kingdom were disheartened, discouraged, disgruntled, didn't know what to do next with their life. Something happened in that cave. Those men ended up becoming David's mighty men after David took over the kingdom. Modern day, you got a bunch of men in front of you looking for leadership, direction, guidance. What would you say to them?
What would I say to um, a group of men that were looking to me for guidance? Remember that it's not about doing, it's about being. Maybe you want more than that.
Mhm.
Um, I think that when somebody asks you who you are, what is your response going to be? For many men, it's this is what I do. They're going to give you their career path.
Right, right,
And they're probably going to talk to you a little bit about some of their other accomplishments. At the end of the day, we're on a this is a Christian podcast, right?
yes,
We're talking about things that are related to how we relate to God. God doesn't care about what you do for him.
right,
He cares about your heart in front of him. And I think we forget that when God says, I love you, that's what he means.
right.
And so for the young man who might be like, what can I do to become a better leader? Take care of your being.
Amen.
And that's why I wrote the book, because I think it's important that men need to have permission to do good self-care. So if we don't do good self-care, leaders are probably, if leaders don't do good self-care, leaders are going to be, they're going to be giving out of an empty bucket
Right.
rather than out of a full bucket.
Amen. That's an awesome answer. Where can guys connect with you? Do you have social media or anything like that, or is just the book?
I have some social media. I wouldn't say I'm super active, but the best place for guys to connect with me is at page.gregwoodard.com. That's going to take them right to my page that's devoted to my book. My book will be out in December.
Okay.
Uh, but also from that page, they can launch to a variety of other places. They can see my services and they can see a little bit about me and they can take that assessment I mentioned earlier.
Do
Um,
you know the launch date of your book?
Well, it's
Specific?
up to me to pick. It's right around the 15th of December. That's the target
Okay.
date right now. That sounds great. Yeah,
Yeah.
page.gregwoodard.com.
Awesome. Greg, I love this conversation. I look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you very much for coming on the show and giving us your wisdom.
All right, Mark. Hey, I appreciate the time and thank you for the opportunity.
God bless you.
Blessings.
If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this conversation is that wholeness doesn't happen by accident. It takes intentionality, and it's built through rhythms: relational, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And you don't have to fix everything at once. Just choose the weakest rhythm and take one small step today. That's how you become the man God has designed you to be. If this episode sharpened you, share it with another man. And make sure you're following the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you're listening and if you caught this for the first time and you're not subscribed, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. It just helps get the word out to more men who need to hear this. More men need to learn about the rhythms and the wholeness of life and how to be whole so that we can be the men that we're supposed to be for the people that we're supposed to reach. So I will see you next time. Stay strong, stay valiant, keep forging your path, and be blessed.